Hello, everybody joining us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ben Martin from Texas Housers. We're going to give folks a few minutes to enter the room, and then we will get started. Thank you again for joining us for this panel. We're really excited about it today. I see we have folks hopping in right now. If you want, go ahead and please put your name and organization if you have one, and where you're joining us from today in the chat so we can kind of know where folks are joining us from. Okay, we have a pretty packed agenda today, so we'll give it one more second for folks to join in. Again, if you want, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And we've got, I'm seeing, gonna let Michael, our tech person on this call, know it looks like the chat is disabled. We have people writing that in the Q&A. I apologize about that. Hopefully we'll get that taken care of here in a moment. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started with the call. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for, oh, there we go. We've got the chat activated now. So thank you for joining us. My name is Ben Martin. I am the research director at Texas Housers, and the panel today is on energy, equity, and housing. It's no secret, no surprise that extreme weather in the state of Texas is now the new normal for us. We have extreme heat in the summer, erratic cold in the winter, and this affects our organizational issue, which is low-income housing. We saw last summer, we received contacts from renters, from low-income households. We heard from community organizations, and certainly I think we saw it a ton in the press, that low-income people were really struggling around the issue of working air conditioning, renters dealing with air conditioning being broken for weeks or even months at a time during the summer heat. And then the kind of twin issue here, the extreme cost of air conditioning just being unsustainable for low-income households. We really kind of keyed into this issue during the heat wave last summer. And this really is a housing issue, right? Our organization focuses on housing affordability, housing habitability, and fair housing. And the issue of access to energy really checks all of these boxes. When we talk about housing being affordable, we're really talking about housing and utilities being affordable. Housing is not habitable if the air conditioning is broken, or if the heat is broken, or if the energy is not working. And of course, we know that the outcomes here are not equitable, and this is a fair housing issue as well. So last summer, we did a little bit of a scan across the field to see what, if we could kind of identify what the issues here that were overlapping with low-income housing. And we released a short report, no original research, but we just kind of wanted to understand and share how we understood this issue. And we came to 4 conclusions. One is that in the state of Texas, air conditioning is not guaranteed for rental households. There's some discrepancy in the courts about how this is enforced, but there is no clear guarantee for air conditioning for rental households. Second, when air conditioning breaks, the infrastructure that's supposed to protect renters to get that air conditioning repaired is very weak. Third is the cost of air conditioning. It's simply not affordable for low-income households. And finally, even if you're living in income-restricted or subsidized housing, in some cases, that's no guarantee that you have access to air conditioning or working or sufficient energy. But we also know that this is its own field that's kind of adjacent, but separate from the work that we do in low-income housing. And so we see today as an opportunity to hear from the experience and the expertise of the people who are leaders in that field. And so the goal of today is to learn from the leaders in the state working from different vantages on the issue of energy equity, and to think about how that informs our work in low-income housing advocacy. I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. I do want to just state a quick couple of ground rules. If you have a question for the panelists, we encourage you to put your question in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring the Q&A for questions. We'll also try to monitor the chat, but if you could put them in the Q&A, that would be helpful for us. And we will give the panelists time to present. We probably won't answer questions during that time, but we will have about 20 minutes at the end of the call today to address those questions and any more that you might have. So with that, again, we're really excited to be joined today by three experts covering research, advocacy, and legislation on energy equity issues. First, I will pass it over to Bobuchi Ken-Opurum to introduce herself.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome again, everyone. I'm happy to be here and happy to sort of share some of the work that we're doing over at TEPRI. I am the Director of Research of the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. We're based in Austin. When we do a lot of research, we conduct, we pilot projects and sort of try to understand the lived experiences and perspectives of households as it relates to advancing clean, reliable, and affordable energy here in Texas. I have a background in building performance, in climate resiliency and heat stress resilience. And so I'm happy to sort of share a little bit of my insights today and looking forward to it.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Carol Biedrzycki. And Carol, you're muted. If you could come off mute, please.
Thank you for reminding me. My computer did not. Usually it does. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Biedrzycki. I am formerly the executive director of Payers Organization to Save Energy. We were an advocacy organization for low-income electric customers throughout the state. I am currently retired. I've been retired since 2018. I hope that I can help in this conversation today. I don't think the issues have changed all that much. Unfortunately, they remain the same for a long time. I also was an active member of the board of the Austin Tenants Council for many years. So I am familiar with the issues that affect renters on a day-to-day basis. And I'm happy to be here today. Ben.
Thank you so much, Carol. And finally, we are joined by State Representative Sheryl Cole. Thank you so much, Representative Cole, for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Sheryl Cole, and I represent House District 46, which is east of Interstate 35 in Austin and runs from 7th Street to Pflugerville and east to Manor. I have a significant amount of rental income properties and low income properties in my district. I've been in the legislature since 2019, and so I'm going into my 6th year and my 3rd term. And I currently sit on the House Administration Committee, Ways and Means and Business and Equity, but have filed legislation having to do with many of the committees. My background, I'm an accountant and a lawyer. And I was active in the school districts in Austin and also sat on the city council where I remember Carol from, and it's good to see you, Carol. And I sat on the city council for 8 years, and then I went to work running for the State House. So I'm looking forward to being here today.
Thank you so much. Well, we are really excited to learn a lot this morning from all three of you. So without further ado, we will get started. And our first panelist is Bobuchi. So we will go, the rest of us will go off camera.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So before we get into our main discussion, I want to provide some background on recent research that TEPRI has done that touches upon energy affordability and its implications for indoor cooling and heating for households that contend with low incomes in Texas. Last year, TEPRI did a statewide survey of almost 7,000 households across Texas to sort of understand, one, the lived experiences, but then also the relationship of households with low incomes to first, affordable energy, second, reliable energy, and then their interest in clean energy. We did the survey by focusing on 13 regions, which are delineated by the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. So we looked deep into each region, and then we looked at the state sort of overview to really understand the linkages across the state. So when it comes to affordability, one of the first questions we asked and we wanted to know is, do you consider your bill to be affordable? And what we found is that 40% of respondents do not consider the bill to be affordable. And you kind of see this on affordability response in the households that are in the lowest income groups, so those making less than $13,000 a year. We also found out that about half of the respondents struggle, at least agree that they struggle to pay their bills most months, which, you know, it's one thing to find your bill unaffordable, but it's also another thing to sort of struggle. So that's pretty significant. And so what we know is that when you have difficulty paying your bill, you tend to make trade-offs to be able to afford that monthly bill. And that can be very extreme because sometimes you cut back on food and medicine. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that about almost 30% of respondents buy less food to keep their lights on. When we looked at the top categories, the main two were entertainment and clothing, but then food was right below sort of where it is. We also found out that households with families are cutting back on school expenses, childcare, and after-school programs. So now looking at, you know, the temperature extremes that we have here in Texas, for those who do live here, you can understand that summers can be pretty brutal. Last summer, for example, was a very historic summer because we had a heat wave and it was very hot. And so the way heat works on the body is, you know, especially like heat stress, is the higher the temperature is, the higher your body can be. And that increases your heart rate. So if you have a higher heart rate and the body temperature keeps increasing, you face risk of being like sick from like heat stroke or headaches or nausea. And if you don't sort of reduce that, your body temperature quickly, then that can lead to more intense effects like death. And so when you think about, okay, households who are probably experiencing sort of like high energy bills, what do they do in the summer? So we wanted to understand, in these extreme temperatures, do they make any changes, or do they, you know, sort of do they go ahead and pay those like expensive bills? What we're finding is that on a statewide, almost 40% of households turn up their AC in the summer to be able to cope with their bills, and then almost 30% turn their AC off completely. So when you really think about, and this sort of differs depending on the region, like some regions are higher, for example, region 13 or region 1, and there's some regions are lower, but overall, when you think about how, you know, over 30% of respondents reported that they turn up the air conditioning, it is pretty concerning. And then, you know, in the other extreme, while Texas doesn't really have significant sort of like winters like you would see maybe in the East Coast, we do have cold snaps, and we do have moments where like the temperature does drop and cause issues such as, you know, Winter Storm Uri. So we also wanted to know, in these like winter, you know, in the winter season and winter temperatures, what do households also do? We're also finding that while it's a bit less than in the summer, over 30% of households still puts their temperature at uncomfortable levels in the winter, and then 25% turn off their heater completely in the winter. And so when you think about more implications of this, for example, lower income households are more disproportionately found, like live more in sort of like older buildings and buildings that may not have proper insulation or are poorly performing. So when you think about this, they have like the experience of having their bills higher because of this, because they have to spend more heating their space. And so this is probably what is leading to people saying, okay, I'm going to turn off my, heater in the winter or turn off my air conditioner in the summer because they have experience paying a lot of bills due to poorly insulated homes. So when you think about overall difficulty in paying bills, and they were saying that, people are making trade-offs, we wanted to understand, is there financial assistance to help people cope with these high energy bills that they're experiencing? And then we asked that question. I found out that like majority of respondents across all income groups do not receive financial help from like financial bill assistance programs like LIHEAP. And we wanted to find out what some of the reasons, and they differed, but the main one we saw was like limited awareness of even having energy assistance programs. Some other people reported like program qualifications. So for example, a lot of the applications want you to have like US citizenship. A few of the other applications want you to have like, your home weatherized. And so if you are a tenant who's sort of living in a home that isn't weatherized, you have that split incentive sort of problem where your landlord may not necessarily be incentivized to weatherize the home because they're not paying the energy bill. And then you yourself who, as a tenant may not want to put that money into weatherizing your home or even getting like energy efficiency, like, Energy Star appliances or LED lighting, for example, because you're not going to be there long term. So that issue is sort of preventing a lot of people from accessing energy assistance. And so this is just a quick summary of what, the affordability part of our survey. We have our regional reports out, which does show sort of the key findings from each different region. And then we're going to have our statewide coming out soon. So if you do want to access our regional reports, feel free to go to this barcode. And if you do have any other questions, you can contact me at tapri.org. Thank you. So I'm just going to leave this on for like a few seconds before, just so you can take the photo or go to the link. Then I will move it back over to you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Bobuchi. This is great. So, can you talk a little bit about you have a statewide report coming out soon. You have the regional reports that are already out. And in the statewide report, so this is really important information about the behavior of households, particularly the behavior of low-income households in response to the high cost of energy and issues around insulation and energy efficiency. What kind of approaches do you see to resolving some of these issues or providing more assistance to these households?
I think sort of the lowest hanging fruit right now would be sort of getting that energy assistance out to households that need it. But I think beyond that, it's more like the middle ground of like wealth building. How can households participate in clean energy, for example, that can give them more money or make them feel like they have the capacity to own their own sort of clean energy? And then education on energy efficiency and sort of behavioral changes that you can do within your home. So even if you do want to turn down your heater or turn down your air conditioning, how can you like better improve more natural ventilation, for example, in the summer? How can you sort of use certain, appliances that can reduce your bill over time so that way you're not really having to make some of those trade-offs. So there's a lot of educational that I think was important in an energy assistance, which is more like directly needed because there's a lot of people that have arrears bills. So it's like addressing those past bills so then they can like be able to float and then pay what they need to pay on a month-to-month basis.
And if there was good awareness of available funding for energy assistance funding, do you think that the funding is enough? Like, is this a problem just of awareness or is this of awareness and available funding?
So one thing I looked at last year, and I haven't looked at the recent years, is I went into the LIHEAP database that is provided, the federal LIHEAP database. And what I realized is that the funding that comes in is not really utilized efficiently. So in certain like regions, for example, the funding does go by quickly, and then in other regions it doesn't go by, so it's sort of sent back to where it came from. And this is because from anecdotal like understanding from talking to like different program administrators in the areas where it does go by, it's like the need is so much, but not enough people can get the money. And then the other areas, there's not enough like staff or resources to be able to get this information out there. So people don't really know about it. So they're not going to ask for the money. So we're having sort of like two, issues. One is like too much demand and then not enough demand because there's not enough resources or like, people to sort of get that information out there to let people know. So it's like an outreach and communication issue as well as a lot of demand. And so maybe finding a way to better sort of distribute those funds, and having the different program administrators talk to each other a bit better. So it's like, oh, I have, we've sort of reached the capacity for funds. Is there more funds that we can capture from different areas? Sort of sharing that better could potentially happen, could potentially help. But this is a research area that we're trying to work on this year. So we're going to know more once we start that research.
Well, thank you so much. I know that we have found the research that you've done so useful in understanding what different households are doing and how they're perceiving this issue in the state. So thank you. We're gonna move over to Carol now. And we'll bring Bobuchi back for the Q&A towards the end of the call. Thank you.
Are you ready for me, Ben?
I am ready for you.
All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carol Biedrzycki. I'm glad to be here today. I don't know if I know any of you that are out there in the audience, so I can't see you, but hello, and it's nice to get in touch with you again. I am here today to talk about more or less solutions to some of these energy equity problems and also like advocacy. And in my 10 minutes, I am going to try and go through some of the basic strategies for actually helping low-income customers and renters with their utility issues, and also to give you a little bit of an idea about where you go to try and get some information and assistance and make changes in what's available today. So first of all, I would like to make a point. I don't know if Bobuchi made it or not, but I do know TEPRI does have some information on this. Low-income households spend a much larger portion of their income on utilities than higher income customers or like average, and it's significant because some families spend more than 50% of their income on their utility bills, whereas on average, the statewide average is about 3%. So there is a lot of, there is a lack of equity in access to utilities, which should be there because they are a necessity. I also want to make the point that utilities are important. They're important because they're important to like our participation in society. They're important to education. They're important to health. They're important to safety. But they are also important to housing and keeping a roof over your head, because if you don't have utilities, you can be evicted. And that is a serious issue. So there is a direct link between being able to afford your utilities and also being able to not only afford housing, but to also to keep a roof over your head. And that is something that I don't think that the state of Texas takes seriously enough. Okay, so we've got people who are having difficulties paying their utility bills and maintaining what is considered a healthy and acceptable level of utility service. What are our solutions? Okay, the first one, which has already been discussed, is payment assistance. There are generally federal funds and local funds that I know of that provide utility bill assistance. Some examples of that, of course, are the federal LIHEAP program, and then individual utilities may have different funds available. A lot of the major utilities, retail electric providers have them. Austin Energy has one. They're distributed by local agencies and the LIHEAP agencies, and it's generally not enough. So anytime we can get more payment assistance, we need to go for it. The second is special rates, and this is actually lowering the bill that is sent to a customer every month. Now, two examples of this. First of all, when they first deregulated the electric market, there was the Light Up Texas program that provided discounts to low-income customers. This was something important that doesn't exist anymore. Another example that is in effect and very effective is the City of Austin's Austin Energy's Customer Assistance Program, which waives the service charge and provides a percentage discount on the bill. And the last numbers that I remember seeing were the average benefit was to customer was a savings of $56 a month. Now, this is a good approach because, number one, the savings are immediate, and to have an extra $56 a month for a low-income family is significant, and the benefit is received immediately, and it makes everything more affordable. The third is like different kinds of customer protection rules and policies, which provide for disconnection moratoriums, deferred payment plans. I have to put in here, I forgot to say with the special rates, the Cadillac rate plan is what they call percentage of income payment plan, which is a PIPP. You can Google it to get more information. It's not why it's used in Ohio. It is where low-income customers only pay a percentage of their monthly income for their utilities, and that covers their cost. And I think that ultimately that type of arrangement is what is the ultimate solution to the affordability issue. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but a lot of people keep trying. There is another program that I tried to promote that never got any traction here in Texas, which is an arrearage reduction plan, where when somebody owes a balance and let's say they pay their bill and then they pay $10 on the balance, they take $20 off the arrearage. And it's a way to allow people to see the light at the end of the tunnel and eventually make themselves whole, because a lot of people just leave arrearages at utilities, and this is a problem. It's been a problem for agencies that have been locating homeless families into permanent supportive housing, and there's a problem because they can't get utility service because they have an outstanding bill. And this is something that also, like, is one of the kinds of areas that I don't think has been addressed significantly. The last strategy after payment assistance, special rates, and customer protection rules is energy efficiency. And as it's already been pointed out, that low-income people tend to live in older properties that are less energy efficient. Their options for changing this are weatherizing the building, appliance replacement, air conditioning replacement. There have been successful refrigerator replacement programs all over the state that have helped, like, reduce bills. And air conditioner replacement, I think, is essential, because any of you out there who has replaced a major appliance in the last 20 or 25 years knows that when you replace it, your electricity bill goes down. And that is something that low-income people need the most. All right, so what do? I like to make this point because a lot of people don't know this. Some of you out there probably are working directly with clients to help them resolve their issues. And when you are helping a client with a problem with an electricity bill or an electricity provider, it's important to make sure you know who that provider is, because it will depend on where you go to get more information or assistance. So first of all, the electric system is very fragmented. We've got regulated utilities. That includes El Paso Electric, Entergy, Sherryland, Texas, New Mexico Power Company. Those are regulated by the Public Utility Commission completely. Then we have, like, the deregulated service areas, where the customer is basically dealing with a retail electric provider. There are about 60 of them across the the PUC also has jurisdiction over these providers. We have 76 electric cooperatives in the state. And each one of those electric cooperatives is governed by a board of directors. That is the ultimate authority. And then we have municipal utilities. There are 72 of those in the state, like the city of Austin, and those are governed by city government. So basically the city council. So if you have a problem, if you have someone who is a customer of a regulated utility or a retail electric provider, your source of information is the Public Utility Commission. Electric cooperative, you've got to find out who's on the board of directors or go to the general manager and start there. And with the municipal utility, I would just recommend, calling a council member or the mayor's office to get more information. And the one point, because I think I'm out of time in about 10 seconds, is that do not contact these people because they do keep track of problems that people have. And if they don't have a database of information, then they're not going to be very responsive to suggestions for, if you don't define the problem, then they don't feel as though there's a need to look for a solution. So don't be quiet, speak up, and use the resources that are available to you to try and make a point that low-income utility customers need help. I think that's it for me, Ben. My time's up.
Thank you, Carol. I'm very excited. I have a few questions for you in the Q&A that we'll get back to in a few minutes.
Okay, all right.
And now we're going to turn it over to Representative Cole. Representative Cole, we've been talking a little bit so far about energy costs, but in the last session and I believe before that as well, you've been kind of addressing the issue of access to air conditioning from more of a legal perspective, and I think we're hoping that you could share a little bit about that with us today.
Yes, I can. During the last session, I filed what was called House Bill 2592. And what that bill did was require landowners to install air conditioning units in their tenants' houses, in their apartments. This had not been done on a statewide basis. It hadn't been required by state law. The air conditioning unit must be considered in good standing or functioning. And the landlord must file a request, a maintenance request on behalf of the tenant within 5 days, rather than what had been the 7 days for other maintenance requests. So they had to make that a priority. In the event that an air conditioning unit goes out, the landlord was required to replace that with a portable air conditioning unit to the tenant, which would be a window unit, or a portable air conditioned unit with a water vaporizer in it are examples. And the idea there is that we wanted to make sure that the landlord was required to put in a unit that would blow cool air. Now, the reason I filed this bill is that I had a call from a tenant, Miss Reyes, and her air conditioning unit had been out about, she had first reported it when it was about 3 to 5 days out, and then it got up to 3 weeks out. And she had called KXAN, which is a local news station, and reported this. And I visited with the landlord owner and also did a clip on KXAN, and then they quickly repaired the unit. But you should not have to call your state rep to get your air conditioning on, and that's why I filed the bill. It wasn't quite 3 weeks, but it was about a week that she didn't have air conditioning. But still, that was a long time to go without your air conditioning unit. Now we know because of climate change that the summers are going to be unbearable for tenants that don't have an air conditioning. And so it was imperative that I filed this legislation. And Council Member Vanessa Fuentes followed up on the legislation, because when I took the bill to committee, which was the House Business and Industry Committee, it did not get a hearing. And that's because it was vehemently opposed by the Texas Apartment Association. And so it did not get a hearing, but the Austin City Council member Vanessa Fuentes picked up on it, and she passed a resolution with a unanimous vote before the Austin City Council that passed, and they will be implementing that resolution later this year. And I was helpful in helping her to do that. And she was also following what had been done in Dallas and Houston. I also filed another bill, which was House Bill 2593. Now, that was a simple bill for a landlord that had an online portal that the tenant reported an air conditioning outage that the landlord had to consider receive a notice of the air conditioning out, because some tenants were reporting on the online portable and still the landlord was not responding to their request. Now, this bill would not require a landlord to implement an online system, but if they had one, they would have to do this. So that was simple enough. I plan to file this piece of legislation again and hopefully get more buy-in from the apartment association, because this is such a big problem, and to reach over across the aisle to get it passed and out of committee. I still expect to hear from tenants this summer and educate them about the bill. And Ben, I'm happy that you had me on the show to talk about it. It's important that we support the legislatures who were friendly for the bill, and that we have contact with all the members to let them know that you support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cole. And as we transition into our Q&A section of the conversation today, we'll invite the other panelists back on camera. But Representative Cole, I'll start with a question for you. What are you hearing from your constituents about the impact of, it seems crazy that they can't even report their air conditioning through something like an online portal, but it sounds like you're hearing from constituents about going for long periods without air conditioning in the heat of summer. What are you hearing about what the effect of that is in their lives?
Well, we know that it's a tremendous impediment to their ability to sleep and take care of their children. I haven't heard as much during the winter months, but I expect that there will be more during the summer.
And I want to extend that question as well in a more general sense around lack of equitable access to energy for low-income households to our other panelists. What does the research say, or what has your experience shown is the short or long-term impact of that for these households?
So I can go. Sort of the long-term is health implications. So if you're in a home that doesn't have, like comfortable indoor thermal situation, then that can affect your health in the long term. If you're someone who has pre-existing health conditions, cardiovascular issues, then being hot or being cold can really exacerbate that. Also sort of the trade-offs that, I showed in the research that people are making, where it's like you're cutting back on food, they're cutting back on medicine. The more vulnerable populations, like the elderly, people who are particularly disadvantaged, or even people of color, when they consistently make these trade-offs, they are affecting their health, they're affecting their economic well-being, and even the capacity to sort of like go to a job. If you want to be able to afford your bill, you may have to move to a place who's like that's farther away, just so you can afford the rent and able to afford the bill as well. So that can impact sort of the opportunities you have to get a job or transportation, all of those things. It's very interrelated, sort of short and long-term issues.
Carol, you laid out a series of possible approaches to solutions. And one thing that I'm not sure that I heard, or maybe you could lay out a little bit more, is are there I shouldn't say that. Are there legal barriers in the state of Texas to implementing some of the ideas that you've mentioned? We may anticipate that there's political barriers, but are some of what you've suggested kind of counter to Texas law as it currently stands?
Yes, Ben, most things statewide are counter to Texas laws if they help tenants or, or consumers for that matter. That's my take on everything. But we did come up with a plan here in the city of Austin, which I think is relevant to everyone here. What we did was, because there were a lot of tenants who were not getting any response from their landlords on air conditioning problems. And I know myself, when I was still working, I would get calls from people who lived in apartments, and they would turn their air conditioning on for 3 days and their bill would be $500. Well, the reason for that is that there are landlords who use their regular maintenance people to repair air conditioners, and they'll like mix parts from one system with another system to keep it going. This like increases the inefficiency of the unit exponentially. The international, and then I started working on looking at the international IPMC. I think it's International Property Maintenance Code, which is the guide that all of the different various cities use. Code enforcement is a local function. So the state can present some kind of a model ordinance to be, model provisions to be adopted, but they can't directly require it, or enforce it. Well, my Austin Women in Housing group, we went to code and we discussed this with them, and now there is what code did. They were responsive to us because the International Property Maintenance Code says that it doesn't say that you have to provide air conditioning, but if there is an air conditioner or any other piece of equipment in that apartment, whenever you rent it, it has to operate as it was intended to, by the manufacturer. And we found out that renters were contacting code about air conditioning problems, but code did not have any standard process for addressing it. So everything was treated differently. Well, what code did was they established an inspection procedure for air conditioners. And then if the air conditioner didn't pass inspection, then there is a note of violation, and then the landlord is required to contact a licensed air conditioning service person, to fix it. Now, it was the first summer, this past summer was the first summer that it was in effect. And I'm just going on my memory here because I tried to verify these numbers. I just remember they gave us a report at the meeting, and I was happy because I worked hard on this, and I think the numbers were like about 600 renters who contacted code about this, and there were like, I believe about 160, 260 notices of violation that were issued. I don't know how that turned out, but I thought, well, that was pretty good, because if that helped like 260 people, that's, not everybody, but it's a start. But this is something that we found worked legally under the code enforcement laws, and I think it's a viable path for other cities, to follow.
I'm going to switch over. We have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. We've had a few statements in the Q&A from Pastor Deb, which is more of a statement, but so part of what Pastor Deb, I think, is getting at here is I don't know. I'm going to filter this through something that I'm hearing. And Carol, a moment ago, you were talking about all of the different types of utility entities and where authority lies. I think for those of us that don't live and breathe the energy sector, this is really confusing. And for a lot of folks to advocate for themselves around this issue, it can be kind of impenetrable. So the question here, I think, is what resources are available, or what advice do you have for community leaders to kind of break into this issue with how complicated it is?
It sounds complicated, but it's not as bad, as it seems. There is a piece that I wrote at Texas Legal Services Center, a guide for the basic attorneys who were taking calls there about these. I will see if that document is still in use, and I'll take a look at it, and people can either access it there, or I'll provide it to you separately. And it's just a very, very basic guide to how to approach a utility issue in Texas.
And I have a question in the chat from Tilly. In your research, have you seen that tenants in older tax credit properties are paying higher utility bills than the utility allowances? I'm not sure if any of our panelists have any experience with the low-income housing tax credit program and have seen anything around utilities there. A good area, a good opportunity for future research.
Yeah, for sure.
And for a question from Leslie, hoping to hear any specific issues relating to rural areas covered today. Bobuchi or Carol, in your experience, what do you know about how this looks in rural areas?
So with our research, we also filtered by rural and urban respondents, and on a statewide level, when it comes to like affordability, urban respondents were more likely to find their bill unaffordable than rural. That doesn't mean that rural still didn't have a significant amount. It was just less than urban. But when you look at regional, in certain regions, particularly like Region 1, for example, there was a significant difference between how rural respondents felt that their bill was unaffordable compared to the urban. And one thing we're also seeing that was very like glaring came down to the other two areas. So that's really like reliable energy and then clean energy perspectives, which we're not really talking about today, but I can mention a little bit, is that when it comes to willingness to pay, a lot of the rural communities were more likely to want to pay up to $20 more in their energy bill for clean energy. So that's what we're seeing with the research. But there is sort of like an area where you need to really look into how, because rural households are still part of that, hard to reach community at times. So it's like, how do they really get energy efficiency, especially when a lot of the homes are like single family, a lot of the homes are older. So there is just a general like relationship between these older homes are not really having as good, that more poorly performing, and then this energy bill sort of affordability as well.
And I have another question. Well, we've got you talking, Bobuchi. From Emily, how granular can we get when looking at utility usage data? For example, is it feasible to find complexes where tenants are using way more electricity than the norm to better target rehab or weatherization funds?
So it would have to be like on a, in Texas, it would have to be sort of on a building by building level. You'd have to get that data from the actual like residents. We do have a few projects, like for example, one of them in South Texas that we're working with, Come Dream, Come Build. They have creating sort of modular homes that are more energy efficient. And so we're trying to do a pilot study to see how households' bills can be reduced by adding solar energy, solar rooftop solar to the homes. So we're doing that, we're getting that old utility bills to see, okay, 5 people lived in this home, here's what their bills were. If they move to this new sort of like the modular home by Come Dream, Come Build, what are those changes in their behavior? Or if they keep the same behavior, how are their bills coming out compared to before? So we have to go like and actually get the data from the households. Which sometimes could be a bit difficult because like in other cities, like in Arizona, I have a friend, a colleague who's doing a study and he's able to get like more census tract data from like households that already exist in a database, be able to use that to benchmark, but sometimes it's difficult in Texas because a lot of this data isn't aggregated. It's sort of like silos. And so it's like, if you can find one way to like get all that information and make some models and say, okay, from what we're seeing in this census tract, if we model it, how is that going to look in the future? How's that going to, stuff like that. So we don't really have that in Texas, but it would be nice to sort of find a way to aggregate all that information. Hopefully that answers your question.
We have a few more questions in the chat. I'd like to ask a question to Representative Cole. You mentioned the opposition, the strong opposition of the Texas Apartment Association to your bill last session to increase protections around ensuring that there is air conditioning in rental units in Texas, and also that if that air conditioning is broken, that it's repaired in short order and that tenants are put up in reasonable accommodations in the meantime. As you think about bringing a bill like this back, can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing in terms of opposition? Like what is the opposition to this, and how do you think about addressing that?
Well, there's a couple of different points that the Texas Apartment Association was making. One was the cost to landlords. And we know that this is not reasonable because there would just be a minimal cost to the landlords unless they had a whole apartment unit or significant amounts of units that didn't have air conditioning or whose air conditioning went out. And another thing that they used against us was the idea that it was an unfunded mandate. It will be something coming from the state that they had to do that didn't require any funding, that didn't come with any funding from the state.
So when you kind of wrestle with bringing this bill back up, what sort of things are you thinking about in terms of countering that messaging, or do you see an opportunity for funding from the state to match that? Sort of what is your approach?
Well, I don't think that we'll have a budget surplus like we had last time. And you see what a fight we had over that. And so I think it'll be imperative that maybe I work with Bobuchi or you to try to figure out what the cost would be and show that it's minimal.
Well, I just have to say this because the focus there, this is the apartment association's stand on almost everything. It's not about the landlord. It is about the tenant who's paying market rent and not getting, the services that are expected. That is the issue, or the services that are required under the terms of the lease. And I think the code route is not a bad way to go. And just for information purposes, this took 2 years to do. It was one of the longest things that I've ever worked on changing. Well, maybe not the longest, but it took 2 years. And that's because code worked consistently with the apartment association to come up with this, like inspection process and procedure, because if they don't agree, then nothing happens. And how did the apartment association get so powerful? I think that's a bigger question, but it's very frustrating, but that's why the focus has to be on the renters who are in that unit, who rents are so high, like all across the state. And if your rent is high, you should have a problem-free, environment. And that's part of the supposed benefit of renting, is that you're not the only thing that you're really responsible for is paying the rent on time. And if you're paying the rent and the air conditioner doesn't work, that is just not the way things are supposed to be. We should be setting up systems where if people have a problem like that, that they can put their rent in escrow, and it wouldn't be provided back to the landlord until the problem, was fixed or the problem was resolved. So anyway, I'm sorry that these things just get me excited and I'll be quiet now.
That's why we're all here.
Okay.
We have just a few more minutes left and quite a few questions in the chat. So we'll see what we can get through and then try to get to closing thoughts in the last minute or two. But I'm going to start with Paresh's question. What efforts can be made to codify access to clean, affordable, and resilient energy access in the development of affordable and sustainable housing? This could be embedded in KPI-linked public financing mechanisms like social bonds, as in the city of New York, or as the city of New York has done.
Well, I'm a member of the Climate Caucus that Aaron Sweener chairs. And, the caucus kind of considers legislative ideas for the future. So she would be a good representative to contact with information. Or you can send that to me and I'll pass it on.
We have a question from Dolores that I don't quite understand. So Dolores, if you want to re-enter it in the chat, it says, why is the burden put on the first? But if you can re-enter that, if we don't get to it today, we'll try to follow up on email with that. Going down to Joey's question, HUD currently has the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which provides funding to improve, among other things, oops, I lost it in the chat here, improve, among other things, energy or water efficiency, and enhance indoor air quality or sustainability of eligible HUD-assisted multifamily properties. Does the panel have any experience applying to this program? Have they seen properties that receive these funds see lower utility bills? Possibly, I'm not sure, Bobuchi, in any of your partnerships that TEPRI is doing, if you've accessed any of these funds through HUD.
So we haven't done it yet, at least since I started at TEPRI, but it's definitely something to consider. I'm going to take a note of that. Thank you, Joey.
There's a similar question about more federal funds from Caitlin, and so maybe I'll just make this more general for the response from the panel, but have we seen new sources of funding, for instance, from the IRA in recent years, and how is that flowing down? How equitably is that flowing down in Texas? And that might be a Bobuchi question as well.
So there is a lot of funding coming through the IRA. In terms of the homes, I know when I last checked, they hadn't decided on that, so I can't really speak on that one. But there is a lot of tax rebates and tax credits coming down the pipeline, and then a lot of Justice 40 funding as well, where you have to do the community benefits planning and ensure that the community is part of the process and project that you're trying to implement. And I think that's very helpful, because a lot of times we may have good intentions, but then we don't really engage the community members. So we just Justice 40 is really helping ensure that that's a work that is focusing on the actual needs of the different communities that are disadvantaged and economically marginalized. But on the customers facing part, there is IRA funding for tax credits and tax rebates that you can utilize. Rewiring America has a good tool called the IRA tax calculator. They can go to as a homeowner or a renter to go find out what are some options that you have. TEPRI is also building a tool, which hopefully should be out in a month or so. that can help you sort of understand ways to like address energy bill assistance, energy efficiency, and then clean energy sort of like plans in the competitive and non-competitive market. But there are a few options available for customers. And then as nonprofits or other community-based organizations, you can also access some of these funds, like the climate change grant that is due in November. There's a solar for all that we just sent in. So there's different like, funding options available that we're trying to like, get funding for to really do a lot of projects to support energy efficiency and clean energy adoption in Texas.
We are right at the hour here, and if folks need to drop off, that's okay, but I'm going to ask one final question of all the panelists. And first, I just want to give a big thank you to everyone. This has been such a rich discussion, and thank you to the audience also for engaging. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you, what's one thing that the folks who have joined this call can do to get involved on this issue?
Well, I think it's imperative that we participate in the advocacy process in the legislature. So stay in touch with your representative and be sure to contact them about legislation that you find favorable.
Sort of following a little bit what Representative Cole said, it's sort of like education of the legislators and the education of the community members and sort of learning from them as well, because they are the front line. They're the front line, they live through this. So really understanding what those needs are on a deeper level, and then getting all that information, collaborating with both the communities and the legislators to ensure that like changes are made and the barriers are addressed is important. And just really getting people to really know that there's a way that they can have a adaptive capacity to make their own change themselves.
I guess I'm next. I'm sorry, but I'm going to like suggest that you need to do a little more work. And first of all, I mentioned earlier that to report complaints, to file complaints, to make them known. It is also important to meet with people who are in charge. And I'm talking about like the public utility commissioners. It's not easy, but if there's something that you want fixed, you need to go and you need to tell them about it. The same thing with your electric cooperative or your, like city council at a municipal utility. Because what happens is if you go to the legislature to fix a problem and you go to a committee meeting, the first thing they're going to say is, well, like, why can't the Public Utility Commission fix this, or why can't like so-and-so fix this? And you need to be able to say, we've already gone there and they said they couldn't do anything about it. So be loud. What was that? Like, come early, be loud, and stay late. That's sort of the attitude that you have to take toward these issues, and you need to talk about them to as many people as you can, and you need to talk to the important people about them. And don't think that that's their job to meet with you, and they will if you're persistent. So get out there and just get in their faces, because if you're not in their faces, if you don't bring up the fact that there's a problem, they think that everything is okay. So let them know that everything is not okay. That's it for me.
An excellent call to action to close us out. Well, once again, I want to extend a huge thank you to each of our panelists and to our audience today. This was a really beneficial conversation for us, and we hope that it was for you all as well. We will follow up with participants to try to answer any remaining questions that we weren't able to address during the conversation today, and to share some of the resources that we've discussed. Thank you once again, and we hope that everyone has a great weekend, and we will continue the work.
Thank you, Ben.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Ben, have a good one.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Come on.